Napoleon's Battles provides a grand tactical miniatures wargaming system for simulating larger actions fought from 1792 through 1815. Ground scale, in 15 millimeter, is 1 inch equals 100 yards. At this scale, players serve as corps, wing, or army commanders. Luck can play a role in the game. That's what reserves are for, and all die rolls make use of 10-sided dice. Casualties are determined by comparing opposing die rolls made by the players. So the game lacks a conventional combat reference table, or CRT, for reference, which speeds both learning the game and actual play. To keep the effects of luck to a minimum, there is a vanity roll, optional roll, that allows players to trade in a free roll marker and so roll again. Board and miniature war games have been borrowing, stealing, elements from each other for many years, so wargaming with miniatures may not be as alien as some hardcore board gamers might think. A few comments on the mechanical differences. Appearance is, in reality, probably the most profound one between board and miniatures wargaming. Should allow an understanding of what goes so terribly wrong on the French right flank at Waterloo. Although primarily intended for games using 15 millimeter scale figures and equipment, allowing most historical battles to be resolved on battlefields the size of ping pong tables, other scales can also be used with Napoleon's Battles. Alternately, die-cut counters and full-color terrain pieces are provided with the game to permit introductory actions on card table-sized battlefields with miniatureless forces of about a corps on each side. Since the game was designed for fighting larger actions, players move masses of troops. The individual figures represent either 120 actual infantrymen or 80 actual cavalrymen. But these figures do not have to be individual, being mounted 4 to a base, saving those of us with stubby fingers from bouts of clumsiness and perpetual embarrassment. A number of these bases, 3 to 5 cavalry, or 4 to 7 infantry bases, roughly 1,000 to 3,400 soldiers, operate together as brigade combat units. Similar to step reduction board games, the number of bases/figures in a brigade unit provides an easy evaluation of its strength as losses accumulate. Casualties are marked figure by figure, and a base is removed for every 4 losses. A model gun and gunner figures on a base, 2 for horse artillery, or 3 for heavy foot artillery, represent a reserve artillery battery combat unit of usually 6 to 8 guns. Because light and medium foot artillery are invariably divided up and attached directly to the infantry, the effects of these guns are factored into the infantry fire and combat values, and they are not represented by separate battery units on the tabletop. General units are used to control the infantry, cavalry, and artillery combat units and are represented by single bases with 1 figure, divisional commander, 2 figures, corps commander, 3 figures, wing commander, or 4 figures, army commander. In addition to the extra figures, general bases also get larger, from 1 inch by 1 inch for divisional commanders to 2 inch square for army commanders, while moving up the chain of command. Labels, which are provided for the Avalon Hill scenarios, are taped to each combat and general unit to identify and provide reference information about each specifically, in the same way that printed designations and factors present this information on board game counters. All units are organized into larger formations, as, for example, the French First Corps at Waterloo. In board war games, it is common to show changes in unit formations by using markers or by flipping the counters. In most miniature war games and in Napoleon's Battles, formations are shown by varying arrangements of the unit bases. There is column, line, march column, and square, which is an infantry-only formation. There is no grid on a miniatures tabletop, so the unit's movements and firing ranges are handled using rulers, or tape measures, and templates instead of hexagons. Most of the information about a type of unit is found on the game's information chart. For a specific scenario, only the units needed are copied onto an information chart. The information on the charts is briefly explained below. The unit type column identifies the type of unit. For example, FRLN. Line infantry is in this column, at the left of the line showing the information relating to all French line infantry units. The 4 combat mods columns give a unit's combat modifiers, depending on the unit's current formation and/or situation. For example, the French line infantry in column formation, COL or LIM, has a -1 modifier. In line formation, LIN or ULM, the modifier is +2. A unit's formation always determines the modifier unless there is a versus other VSOT situation. The modifier in the VSOT column applies for cavalry, when favorable, only if it is the modifying or largest unit attacking infantry that is in any formation but square, or for infantry when it is unfavorable, if in combat with any infantry, even if not the modifying unit while in square formation, or if in combat with any attacking cavalry, even if not the modifying unit while not in square. If more than one combat unit is involved in any individual combat from the same side, the modifiers that apply to the largest unit, the one with the most bases, are the ones used. The DRDRT, disorder route, column shows the number of figures that a unit must lose in a single fire phase or individual combat, regardless of the number of combat rounds, in order to be disordered or routed. For example, British line infantry has a 2/5 factor. This means that if a British line infantry unit suffers one hit, for example, up to the disorder number, there is normally no effect other than adding another casualty. For 2, 3, or 4, for example, up to the route number, losses during a fire phase or combat, the unit is disordered. If it takes 5 losses, it is routed. A disordered unit is unable to fire, may not move to cause combat, moves at half speed, and a -3 modifier applies in combat. A disordered unit recovers if it is not moved during the movement phase. A routed unit, as one might expect, is worse than worthless until rallied by a general. The RSP DSP column, response dispersal, indicates a unit's response and dispersal numbers. The response number shows how well a unit is commanded and/or drilled and is used for a variety of purposes. A routed combat unit can be rallied by rolling its response number or less. Infantry attacked by cavalry attempts to form an emergency square by rolling its response number or less, usually favorably modified if the unit is in column formation. Such formation change is impossible, however, if another enemy combat unit is already touching or within 1-inch distance of the brigade. Cavalry that wins a combat may continue moving and/or attacking if its response number or less, modified unfavorably, can be rolled. This is called a recall attempt. Failure sends a cavalry unit forward, out of control. French and the King's German Legion cavalry, with only a -2 for recall rolls, are generally easier to keep in hand. The dispersal letter is used for infantry and cavalry brigades before a battle starts, cross-gridded with the number of figures in the combat unit in the dispersal chart on the game card. This gives a unit's dispersal number, which, for easy reference, is printed on the unit's label. When the number of surviving figures in a unit equals that unit's dispersal number, the unit is considered to no longer be combat effective and is immediately removed from play. The Fire Mods column, Fire Range or Fire Modifier, shows a unit's maximum fire range in inches and its fire modifiers. Since mounted cavalry may not fire, this entry is left blank for cavalry units. The 3 movement columns give a unit's maximum movement in inches, depending on the unit's current formation. Note that the line, LIN, or unlimbered, ULM, factors are the ones used if any formation changes are made. The 3 Move Mods columns show the movement costs used by a unit in various situations. For example, using the column headed BCK or SID, British Light Cavalry moving backwards uses the rate 2 for 1. Subtract 2 inches from the unit's movement factor for each inch moved backwards. The CGFM column, change formation, simply shows a value in inches. If a unit changes formation, the given number is subtracted from the unit's movement in inches. Napoleon's Battles is a scenario game. That is, it provides a game system that can be used in a great variety of different situations. A point system is provided to allow players to design their own scenarios or to balance historical scenarios. In addition, there is a reference list with the command rating for over 800 of the era's generals. The original game also includes 8 scenarios, 2 hypothetical and 6 historical: Marengo, Auerstadt, Eylau, Talavera, Borodino, and Waterloo. Avalon Hill also published a module with 9 more scenarios, 1 hypothetical and 8 historical: Valmy, Friedland, Corunna, Aspern-Essling, Ocano, Salamanca, Leipzig, a real monster battle, and Crayon. With the publishing of scenarios for Quatre Bras and Ligny, there are now 19 published scenarios, 16 of them historical, available from Avalon Hill. So you have the battlefield laid out, and the troops are formed up in their starting positions. Now what? A game plays depending on how such information above is used in sequence of play. The sequence of play in Napoleon's Battles is the old familiar move, counter-move system. But this is what best reflects the grand tactics of the period, with some interesting bells and whistles. Proceeding through the sequence in a short and simplified manner, some less important steps are left out, a turn starts with the first side phases. In the Battle of Waterloo scenario, the French are the first side. Once the first side phases are completed, an identical second side phases sequence is performed by the second side. In the Waterloo scenario, the Anglo-Allies. A side begins with its control phase. During a control phase, a side brings any arriving units onto the battlefield and attempts to rally routed combat units that have a commanding general touching them. But checking command control is usually the most important part of this phase. Every general has a command span, expressed in inches, and can exercise control over units below it in its chain of command that are located within the command span. A divisional general can control subordinate combat units within his span, but higher echelon generals may only control subordinate general units within their span. A corps, wing, or army commander must touch a combat unit to control it directly. But a general unit that touches any combat unit or units, such attachments are necessary to rally routed troops or to add a general's combat modifier or qualify level to a unit, controls only the units in actual contact. For example, the command span drops to 0 inches. Combat units that are not in the command span of a divisional general or touched by a higher echelon commander may not be moved. Basically, subordinate general units that are not in control of a higher ranking general must make a response roll. If the general's response number, printed on the label on each base, or less is rolled with a die, the general's subordinate units may be moved normally, a reduced move in some cases, or if the roll exceeds the response number, the general's combat units have their movement reduced. In some cases, they may not be moved at all. Next, we come to the maneuver phase. This is when the bulk of the movement takes place and is divided into 3 important steps. First is the all-out attack step, a sort of send in the guard rule. This allows some special elite infantry units to attack and keep attacking, although each combat round expends movement, until they are beaten or their movement allowance is exhausted. Firing and/or combat occur each time a unit moves, handled as during the firing and combat phases explained below, but only with or against the units that have just moved. Using this step can be a powerful ploy in itself, but the attacking units can also be moved during the next step. Just don't get too cocky. The guardsmen are as easy to hit with firepower as militia, and when they are routed or eliminated, they count as multiple units lost. A French Old Guard infantry brigade counts the same as 5 normal brigades for army morale. The movement step follows when all of a side's eligible units can be moved. If desired, any cavalry unit that is not moved or already marked with another status marker may have a react marker placed on it, reserving its movement for later. We'll touch on that in a moment. Disordered units that are not moved may have their disorder markers removed. Last, but certainly not least, comes the reaction step. During the reaction step, any of the non-phasing side's cavalry units with a react marker may be moved as desired, followed by the moving, if wished, of any of the phasing side's reacting cavalry that can be maneuvered into combat with the enemy cavalry that has just moved. Since stacking is not allowed, at least not with my miniatures, there must be room to actually place any reacting cavalry unit. The fire phase is next. The non-phasing side fires first, then the phasing side fires. One unit takes a shot by firing at one target that lies to its unblocked front within its firing range. A fire phase simulates long to medium range artillery fire, skirmisher fire, and possibly long-range musket volleys. Losses from the non-phasing fire can affect the phasing fire. For example, a phasing unit that is disordered by non-phasing fire cannot be fired, as disordered units may never fire. A shot is resolved by both players rolling 1 decimal die. Each firing unit has its own modifiers, for example, +1 for British line infantry, and other generic modifiers that may apply for cover, such as -2, the number of infantry bases firing, +1 for 6 bases, -1 for 3 bases, and so forth. All firing modifiers apply to the firing side. Any modifiers are applied and the numbers are compared. If the firing side's modified roll exceeds the enemy's roll by 2 times or more, 2 hits are marked on the target, only 1 hit on an artillery unit. If the modified roll simply exceeds the enemy's roll, 1 hit is marked on the target unit, no hits on an artillery unit. Otherwise, the shot misses. Following the fire phase is the combat phase. A combat phase simulates close-range musket and artillery fire and possible hand-to-hand combat. Individual combats involve opposing units that are actually touching. Combat should be divided up so that each individual combat contains only 1 combat unit. Attached artillery units are not treated as separate units for this purpose, on one or both sides. An individual combat may require a number of combat rounds to resolve, as combat continues until somebody routs or drives off all opposing units. An advanced rule allows units to attempt to withdraw. Since artillery and general units may be attached to a friendly cavalry or infantry unit that they touch, touching an attached artillery or general unit is considered to be the same as contacting the infantry or cavalry unit to which they are attached. A combat round is resolved by both players rolling 1 decimal die. but the comparison is handled differently than for firing. Any modifiers, each unit has its own combat modifiers depending on formation and situation, and other generic modifiers may apply for holding cover, the number of bases involved, etc., are applied and modified numbers compared. If one side's modified combat roll exceeds the enemy's roll, a number of hits equal to the difference are marked on the unit with the lower roll. This is tempered by the fact that no unit can lose more figures than an individual combat, regardless of the number of rounds, than its routing number. If no enemy unit is routed, dispersed, or eliminated in a combat round, any cavalry involved will be disordered and bounce out of combat. If opposing units are still in contact, another combat round, where the combat modifiers may be different, is resolved until all contact between opposing units end. A winning unit always takes one loss for routing or eliminating one or more enemy units in an individual combat. A pursuit phase rounds out a side's turn. At this time, the phasing side may, as desired, move any of its cavalry units with a react marker, and the non-phasing side may then attack any of these with any of their reacting cavalry. Firing and/or combat occur as during the fire and combat phases, but only with or against the units that were just moved. The second side then repeats all of the previously described steps and phases. When this is done, the passage of one turn, 30 minutes, is recorded and the next turn begins. If a battle goes the full number of turns, victory points for terrain objectives and casualties are counted to determine a winner, actually a form of marginal victory. For a side to claim an immediate or decisive victory, it is necessary to disperse or eliminate and/or have routed a number of enemy infantry and cavalry brigades equal to the enemy's army morale number, printed on the label for the Army Commander General Unit. If this is done, the enemy is considered to have been driven from the field in ruin.